It is 4 o'clock in the morning on the 13th of September, 1759. The St. Lawrence River is a ribbon of black glass, cold and silent. In the darkness, British longboats, packed with the first wave of soldiers, scrape against the shore of a small cove called the Anse aux Foulons. Above them looms a 175-foot cliff, a sheer, wooded precipice that the French High Command considers a natural, impassable wall. A light picket of perhaps 100 men guards the summit, more as a token watch than a serious defense. They believe the terrain itself is their greatest ally. This belief is a fatal miscalculation. The first men ashore are the elite British light infantry. Their commander, Colonel William Howe, leads them not in a charge, but in a desperate climb. They sling their 75 caliber Brown Bess muskets and begin to scale the steep path, pulling themselves up by tree roots and shrubs, boots slipping on loose shale. Their orders are to secure the path, overwhelm the picket, and, in doing so, unlock the door to a continent. This is the culmination of a long, bitter and failing campaign. For months, a powerful British expeditionary force under Major General James Wolfe has been trying and failing to take the fortress city of Quebec, the very heart of New France. The city, perched on its high rock, has proven impregnable. The British army is sick, camped in frustration on the Île d'Orléans, staring across the water at the fortress they cannot reach. The Royal Navy, commanded by Rear Admiral Charles Saunders, has done its part. His ships control the river. They have bombarded Quebec's lower town for weeks, reducing it to a landscape of shattered stone and burning rubble. But the core defences on the heights remain untouched. The French commander, Lieutenant General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, is a skilled and cautious opponent. He has refused to be drawn into the open-field European battle that Wolfe craves. He simply waits behind his formidable walls and the extensive entrenchments at Beauport, knowing that time is his most powerful weapon. The Canadian winter is coming. The river, the British lifeline, will soon freeze. Admiral Saunders' fleet will be forced to depart, or be crushed by the ice. When the ships leave, the army must leave with them. The entire campaign, costing millions of pounds and thousands of men, is on the verge of humiliating collapse. Major General Wolfe is a man pushed to the very edge. He is brilliant, ambitious, and terminally ill, likely with tuberculosis. His dispatches home have grown dark. He is under immense, unbearable pressure to secure a victory. This landing at the Anse aux Foulons is not a pre-planned stroke of strategic genius. It is a desperate, last-ditch gamble, born of failure. It is an operation that relies entirely on audacity, split-second timing, and the enemy's assumption that such a move is impossible. Wolfe is risking his entire army, the fate of the war, and the future of the British Empire in North America on this one. Mad scramble up a cliff in the dark. As Colonel Howe and his men climb, the fate of a continent hangs in the balance, balanced on the point of a single bayonet. The silence of the pre-dawn hours is shattered by a challenge. A voice calls out from the top of the cliff. Qui vive? Who goes there? The entire operation pauses, balanced on a knife edge. The French sentry, hearing the sounds of boats and men, is alert. In one of the lead boats is Captain Donald MacDonald, an officer of the 78th Fraser's Highlanders. He is not just a soldier. He is a man who speaks fluent, perfect French. In the darkness, he calls back, his voice steady, projecting an air of routine. He claims they are a French supply convoy, provisioning the men upstream. He bluffs, citing the very units the sentry would expect, the Troupes de la Marine. The sentry hesitates. The Royal Navy has been conducting feint maneuvers for days, sailing ships upriver past the city, forcing the French to shuttle their troops to follow them. This bluff, this story of a supply convoy running the blockade, is just plausible enough. The sentry is satisfied. He lowers his musket. The boats scrape the shore, and the first wave disembarks. Colonel Howe's light infantry, followed by the Highlanders, begin their ascent. It is a grueling, agonizing climb, a near-vertical scramble. The 175-foot path is steep, wooded, and choked with undergrowth. Men are slipping, grasping at roots, silently cursing as their heavy equipment snags. Their 17-inch socket bayonets clatter against their scabbards. They are not climbing as an army, but as a scattered line of desperate individuals. But they are motivated by a shared purpose. They reach the summit, emerging from the woods like ghosts, and find the French picket, its guard lowered by Captain MacDonald's ruse. The French, commanded by a Captain Louis Dupont de la, are caught completely by surprise. The British light infantry and Highlanders do not wait for orders. They fix bayonets and charge. The fight is short, brutal, and one-sided. The small French force, many of them colonial militia, is overwhelmed, scattered, and broken. The path is secure. The gateway to Quebec is open. Back at the cove, the operation accelerates. The longboats, driven by the Royal Navy sailors, begin a relentless ferry service, rowing back and forth across the St. Lawrence, bringing the main body of the army from the ships to the shore. Thousands of men, the 28th, 35th, 43rd, 47th, 48th, and 58th regiments of foot. The elite Louisbourg Grenadiers, veterans of a previous siege, and the grim kilted forms of the 78th Fraser's Highlanders. As they land, they are organized into columns and begin the long, arduous march up the cliff path, now secured by their comrades. By 6 o'clock in the morning, as the first grey light of dawn breaks over the river, Major General James Wolfe steps ashore. He is weak, his body ravaged by illness, but his mind is ablaze. He surveys the scene, the steady column of redcoats moving up the cliff, and knows the most dangerous part of his gamble has succeeded. He follows his men to the summit, and there, as the sun rises, his army begins to deploy on the one piece of ground he has coveted for months, the Plains of Abraham. Named for a 17th century pilot, Abraham Martin, it is a farmer's field, a grassy, relatively flat plateau used for pasture. It is the perfect stage for the 18th century European battle, the very kind of engagement that Montcalm has so expertly denied him. The British forces march out of the woods at the top of the path and, with the practiced, mechanical precision of a parade ground drill, begin to form a line of battle. Drums beat the cadence. Officers shout commands. Sergeants dress the lines. The red-coated ranks wheel and deploy, their regimental colours unfurled in the morning breeze, creating a single solid red wall just outside the weak western defences of Quebec City. By 8 o'clock, 4,800 elite, professional British regular troops stand in formation, a spectre of an army that has appeared, as if by magic, at the gates of an impregnable fortress. They are ready. Now, all they have to do is wait. Miles away, at his headquarters in the Beauport camp, Lieutenant General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm is alerted. It is 8 o'clock in the morning. The first reports are confused. The British are on the heights. He dismisses them. It is impossible. He knows the cliffs at Anse-au-Foulon are unscalable by an army. He assumes it must be a small, desperate raiding party, perhaps a few hundred men, sent to cause chaos while the real attack comes, as he has always expected, here at Beauport. But the reports become more frantic, more certain, an entire army. He mounts his horse and rides hard toward Quebec. When he reaches the city's western edge and passes through the walls, the full, horrifying truth strikes him. There, on the farmer's field known as the Plains of Abraham, is the entire British army. They are not a raiding party. They are 4,800 elite regulars, formed in a perfect two-deep line of battle. Their red uniforms a stark, bloody line against the green grass. Their regimental flags snap in the morning wind. They are less than a mile from the city's weakest defences. In a single stroke, Wolfe has rendered Montcalm's entire defensive strategy, the Beauport entrenchments, the fortress walls, the reliance on the river, utterly obsolete. The British are not at the door, they are inside the house. This is the moment where the deep, bitter divisions in the French command structure become fatal. Montcalm, a skilled European general, is not in sole command. He shares it and despises his counterpart, the Governor-General of New France, Pierre de Vaudreuil. Vaudreuil is Canadian-born, a politician who constantly quarrels with Montcalm, mistrusting his European methods. Their infighting has crippled the unity of command. Now, faced with this crisis, there is no single, decisive authority. Montcalm is on the scene, but Vaudreuil is elsewhere. His full army, totaling some 13,000 men, is scattered. A key detachment of 3,000 troops under Colonel Bougainville is miles upstream, having been successfully lured away by Admiral Saunders' naval feints. Montcalm is faced with a terrible choice. He can wait. He can pull his men back inside the city walls and wait for Bougainville to return, to consolidate his full strength. He could use his field artillery to harass the British, who had managed to drag only 2 small cannons up the cliff. He could even entrench opposite the British line. This would be the cautious, professional move. But the sight of that red line, the sheer audacity of Wolfe's gamble, seems to break his composure. He is a man shocked, horrified, and perhaps insulted. He sees an enemy that has outmaneuvered him, and he reacts not with cold calculation, but with impulsive rage. He makes the fatal decision. He will not wait. He will not consolidate. He will march out of the city, now, and fight Wolfe on the very ground Wolfe has chosen, on the very terms Wolfe has dictated. He believes he must drive the British off the plateau before they can dig in and begin a formal, unstoppable siege. At approximately 9:30 in the morning, Montcalm gives the order. The French regiments, the Régiment de la Sarre, de Languedoc, de Béarn, de Guyenne, and Royal Roussillon, are mustered. They are a mixed, hasty force. He has his troupes de terre, the regulars from France, perhaps 2,000 strong. But to match Wolfe's numbers, he must bulk out his line with his troupes de la marine and, most disastrously, thousands of Canadian militia. These militia are superb, hardened fighters in the La Petite Guerre, the skirmishing, ambush warfare of the Canadian wilderness. But they are not disciplined line infantry. They have never been trained to stand shoulder to shoulder in the open field, to fire in controlled volleys, and to face a bayonet charge. This hodgepodge army, 4,500 men in total, marches out of the gates of Quebec and begins to deploy on the Plains of Abraham, facing the silent, waiting British line. The stage is set. The two armies now face each other across the grassy plateau, separated by less than a quarter of a mile. The cool morning air of September 13th is thick with a terrible, vibrating tension. On one side, the French, a line of white and grey uniforms, mixed with the buckskin and civilian clothes of the Canadian militia. Their deployment is hurried, slightly disordered, a force cobbled together in a moment of panic. On the other, the British, a single immaculate line of red, unmoving as stone. Major General James Wolfe has made a critical tactical decision, one that demonstrates both his confidence in his men and the desperate nature of his situation. He has deployed his 4,800 troops in a line only 2 ranks deep, not the standard European 3. This is a gamble. A 2-deep line is less resistant to a cavalry charge and can be more easily broken. But Wolfe has no fear of cavalry here, and the trade-off is what he needs. By sacrificing depth, he maximizes his frontage, stretching his line wide enough to cover the entire width of the plateau, preventing the French from lapping around his flanks. More importantly, it ensures that every single one of his 4,800 soldiers will be able to fire in the opening volley. There will be no third rank held in reserve. Every musket will be brought to bear. Wolfe rides slowly along the line, from the 35th foot on the left to the Louisbourg Grenadiers on the far right flank, near the cliff edge. He is a conspicuous, lanky figure, pale and visibly ill, but his presence electrifies his men. He gives them their final, simple and brutally difficult orders. They are to stand. They are not to move. They are not to fire. They will hold their fire no matter what, until the French are at point-blank range. This is the core of British infantry doctrine, a test of nerve and discipline that is almost superhuman. To make this single decisive volley as catastrophic as possible, he has given another chilling order. His men are to double-shot their muskets. They have loaded their 75 caliber Brown Bess muskets, not with the standard single lead ball, but with two. A single musket ball, combined with the heavy black powder charge, creates a devastating weapon. Two balls will create a shotgun-like blast, a wall of flying lead. At close range, it is guaranteed to tear apart any formation it hits. But it is a tactic that can only be used once, at the beginning of the fight. The time it would take to reload such a charge in the heat of battle would be suicidal. Wolfe is staking everything on the first 60 seconds of the engagement. His seconds in command, Brigadier General Robert Monckton and Brigadier General George Townshend, take their positions. The sergeants walk the line, making final checks. "Hold, lads. Wait for the command. Let them come." Across the field, the French are restless. Their commanders can be seen shouting, trying to dress their own mixed lines of regulars and militia. The contrast between the two armies is a perfect visual representation of their doctrines. The French, a combination of European regulars and wilderness skirmishers, advancing with a nervous, ragged energy. The British, a silent two-deep wall of red, a machine built for a single, perfect moment of violence. The minutes stretch into an eternity. The only sound is the shuffling of thousands of feet, the snap of flags in the wind, and the beat of the French drums, tapping out the advance. At approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, the French army begins to move. Montcalm gives the order to advance. The drums roll, and the mixed line of 4,500 men lurches forward, stepping off across the plains of Abraham. Their objective is to close with the British and break their thin red line with a bayonet charge. But from the very first step, the fatal flaw in Montcalm's hasty plan becomes apparent. His army is not a single, cohesive weapon. It is two different armies forced to fight as one, and they immediately begin to work against each other. The French regulars, the troupes de terre, dressed in their white and blue uniforms, understand the grim calculus of 18th century linear warfare. They advance with their Charleville muskets shouldered, bayonets fixed, intending to hold their fire until the last possible moment, just as their British counterparts are doing. But intermingled with them, and on their flanks, are the thousands of Canadian militia. These are not parade ground soldiers. They are frontiersmen, hunters, and farmers, veterans of countless brutal skirmishes in the forests of North America. They are masters of la petite guerre, the war of ambush, cover, and individual marksmanship. They have been taught by necessity to fire from behind trees, to take aimed shots, and to reload by dropping to one knee or lying flat on the ground. In the open, exposed expanse of the plains of Abraham, their instincts betray them. As the French line advances, the militia, unused to the silent, disciplined nerve of the redcoats, become anxious. They are walking, exposed, toward a silent wall of men who refuse to fire. Well outside of effective musket range, perhaps 80 to 100 paces, the militia's discipline breaks. Individuals begin to fire, their muskets popping off in a ragged, uncontrolled sputter. They fire at too great a distance for their .69 caliber musket balls to do any significant damage to the British line. Then, true to their wilderness training, many of them drop to the ground to reload. This act is a catastrophe. It rips gaping holes in the French line, and the regulars of the Régiment de la Sarre and Royal Roussillon are forced to stumble over their own comrades, who are now lying on the grass. The advance, which should have been a steady, intimidating steamroller, dissolves into a disorderly, stumbling, and chaotic crowd. The cohesion of the French regulars is shattered before they have even fired a shot. The British line stands. A few men fall, hit by the random long-range potshots, but the line as a whole does not flinch. They watch the enemy's clumsy, self-defeating approach. They see the French stop, start, and try to reform, all while a ragged, ineffective fire continues to crackle from their ranks. The British hold their double-shotted muskets at the ready. They are a force of pure potential energy, a coiled spring. Major General Wolfe is in the thick of it, riding just behind the 28th foot. He is an easy target, and a militia marksman finds him. A musket ball strikes his wrist. He barely notices, wrapping a handkerchief around the wound. He continues to ride the line, his voice clear and steady, urging his men to hold. Hold, lads, hold. Wait for it. The French, their charge now a disjointed mess, absorb a second, equally ineffective volley from their own militia. Montcalm, seeing his attack falling apart, orders his regulars to halt and fire a general volley, hoping to steady the line. But it, too, is delivered at too great a distance, over 60 yards, and the rounds whistle harmlessly over the heads of the waiting British. The French line is now a disorganized mass, enveloped in its own cloud of white powder smoke, having wasted its first, best punch. They begin a final ragged rush, a bayonet charge that has lost all of its momentum. They are now just 40 paces from the British line. 40 paces. A football field's throw. It is the range Wolfe has been waiting for. They are 40 paces apart. The disorganized French line, a mix of white uniforms and buckskin, is rushing forward through the thick, acrid haze of its own wasted gunpowder. For the 4,800 British soldiers standing in their two-deep line, this is the moment. The front rank of the enemy is clear, a dense mass of men, so close they can see the desperation in their eyes. The command rings out along the British line. Present! Thousands of 75 caliber Brown Bess muskets are snapped to the shoulder, a single fluid motion of metal and wood. The officers wait one more heartbeat, a final agonizing second of silence. Fire! The entire British line disappears in a single deafening crash of 4,000 muskets, firing as one. It is not the ragged popping of the French advance. It is a single concentrated explosion, a clap of thunder that echoes off the city walls. The double-shotted charges, 2 lead balls from each musket, create a devastating, horizontal scythe of lead. This wall of metal, fired at point-blank range, tears into the front rank of the French army. The effect is not a volley, it is a dismemberment. The French line does not just stop. It is shattered, blown backward, as if hit by a physical wave. Regulars and militia alike are torn to pieces. The front rank of the French army simply ceases to exist, dissolving into a nightmarish tangle of dead and wounded. The entire plain is instantly and completely obscured by a dense, choking cloud of white-grey-black powder smoke. The smell of sulphur is overwhelming, burning the eyes and throat. For a few moments, the two armies are blind, separated by a man-made fog of war. The British, drilled to perfection, use this moment. They stand firm. They do not cheer. They do not break rank. With mechanical precision, they begin the 15-second multi-step process of reloading. They reach into their cartridge boxes, tear the paper cartridge with their teeth, pour a little powder in the pan, shut the frizzen, pour the rest down the barrel, ram home the single ball and wadding, and bring the musket back to the ready. As the great white cloud begins to shift and part, the British see the full extent of the carnage. The field is a red and white carpet of bodies. The French attack has been broken, its momentum utterly destroyed. The survivors, stunned and horrified by the sudden catastrophic violence, are reeling in panic. Before they can even comprehend the scale of the disaster, the British line has reloaded. A second volley, this one with a single ball, rips through the disorganized mob, adding to the slaughter. It is in this same exchange of fire that Major General James Wolfe, still riding near the front, is struck again. A musket ball hits him in the chest. He slumps from his horse, mortally wounded. At the same time, his second-in-command, Brigadier General Monckton, is also struck, taking a severe wound to the chest that puts him out of the fight. The British command structure is suddenly decapitated, but the battle has already passed the point where a general is needed. The disciplined mechanism of the British infantry, set in motion by Wolfe, will now see the battle to its conclusion. The French army is no longer a fighting force. It is a routed mob, a collection of terrified individuals. Their only thought is to escape. The battle has been decided in less than 15 minutes. The French army, shattered by 2 perfect concentrated volleys, is now a terrified rabble. They have no organization, no cohesion, no will to fight. They are fleeing for their lives. The command rings out from the surviving British officers. Advance! With a great guttural roar of huzzah, the entire British line surges forward. This is no longer a disciplined march. It is a vengeful, adrenaline-fueled pursuit. The redcoats lower their brown Bess muskets, the 17-inch socket bayonets gleaming, and charge into the dissipating smoke. On the right of the British line, the 78th Fraser's Highlanders, who had been held in check by Wolfe's iron discipline, are finally unleashed. With a primal scream, they break into a full run, casting aside their muskets to draw their terrifying traditional weapon, the basket-hilted broadsword. They are the first into the fleeing French ranks, their charge a whirlwind of cold steel and Gaelic oaths. They are not taking prisoners. This final charge breaks the last vestiges of French resistance. The rout is total. The fleeing French army splits into two streams of panic. One group, the regulars, flees in terror back toward the weak western walls of Quebec City, desperate to get behind the stone ramparts. The other group, primarily the Canadian militia, breaks away toward the St. Charles River, running down the steep slopes of the plateau, knowing the wilderness is their only sanctuary. Lieutenant General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm is caught in this tide of his own defeated men. He is on horseback, just outside the St. Louis gate, trying desperately to rally the fugitives, to form some kind of rear guard, to stop the complete collapse. But his men are deaf to his commands, streaming past him in blind panic. As he turns, a volley of canister or grape shot, a shotgun-like blast from one of the two small British cannons that had been dragged up the cliff, tears through the air. Montcalm is struck in the lower back and abdomen, a mortal wound. He slumps in his saddle, but does not fall. Supported by two of his soldiers, he manages to stay mounted as he is carried through the gate with the last of his retreating army, a dying general leading a defeated force back into a city that is now doomed. Miles away, at the other end of the field, the victor of the battle is also dying. Major General James Wolfe lies on the grass, cradled by his officers. The musket ball to his chest is a fatal wound. He is slipping into shock, his vision failing. A lieutenant near him, peering through the smoke, suddenly cries out, "They run, sir! They run!" Wolfe, drifting in and out of consciousness, manages to ask, "Who run?" The officer replies, "The French, sir. They are running everywhere." A final spark of clarity and energy returns to the dying general. He gives his last tactical order. "Go, one of you, to Colonel Burton. Tell him to march Webb's regiment down to the St. Charles River to cut off the retreat." Then he turns on his side. His famous last words are a murmur of perfect final relief. "Now, God be praised, I will die in peace." With Wolfe dead and Monckton gravely wounded, command of the British Army on the Plains of Abraham passes to the third in command, Brigadier General George Townshend. He is a cautious, methodical man, and he immediately restores order. He halts the bloody pursuit. The battle is won, but the city of Quebec has not yet fallen. He knows Bougainville's 3,000 fresh troops are still somewhere upstream, and Vaudreuil still commands thousands of men in the Beauport camp. Townshend pulls his victorious army back into their original line of battle, now facing the city. They have won the field. Now they will begin the siege. The sound of bagpipes from the 78th Highlanders skirls across the plain, a mournful, triumphant sound in the sulphur-heavy air. Inside the walls of Quebec, the night of September 13th is one of pure chaos and despair. The city is flooded with the broken remnants of Montcalm's army, terrified regulars, wounded men, and panicked militia, all mixed with the city's civilian population. The St. Louis gate, where their dying general was carried in, is now barred. The British, under the new command of Brigadier General George Townshend, have not stormed the city. They do not need to. They are digging in on the Plains of Abraham, bringing more cannons up from the fleet, and beginning to lay the formal, inescapable lines of a European siege. The trap is sprung. The French command structure, already crippled by the rivalry between Montcalm and Governor-General Vaudreuil, completely disintegrates. Vaudreuil, the Canadian-born governor, had been at his Beauport camp during the battle. He still technically commands a numerically superior force, including the 3,000 fresh, undefeated troops under Colonel Bougainville, who had finally arrived to find the battle already lost. But Vaudreuil is a politician, not a field commander, and he is seized by panic. He sees the defeat on the plains as the end of all hope. Instead of using his superior numbers to organize a counterattack against Townshend's exhausted army, his only thought is to save his remaining forces from the trap. In a council of war held that evening, against the advice of some of his more stalwart officers, Vaudreuil makes a decision that will seal the fate of New France. He orders a general retreat. He will abandon Quebec to its fate. Under the cover of darkness, the entire remaining French army, thousands of men from the Beauport camp, along with Bougainville's detachment, slips away from the city, marching west, up the St. Lawrence River, toward Montreal. They leave behind only a token garrison of militia and a few regulars to man the walls, a force with no leader, no supplies, and no hope. The city, which had withstood the British for months, has, in a single night, been abandoned by its own army. In a house within the battered city, Lieutenant General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm is dying. The surgeons have examined his wounds. The canister shot has torn his lower abdomen, and it is a mortal injury. He is told he will not live through the night. A priest is summoned. The general, who had been impulsive and rash in battle, now faces his end with a calm, stoic dignity. He spends his final hours giving what advice he can to the city's defenders, but his thoughts are on the battle. He knows his gamble, his decision to rush out of the city, has cost his king an empire. As the dawn breaks on the morning of September 14, 1759, Montcalm, the defeated defender of New France, dies. He is buried in a simple grave, a crater in the floor of the Ursuline Chapel, a shell hole torn open by the very same British naval bombardment that had preceded his final battle. The two opposing generals, Wolfe and Montcalm, both brilliant, both flawed, are now united in death, having met their end on the same small field of battle. One died in the moment of his greatest triumph. The other lived just long enough to see the full, catastrophic consequences of his final defeat. The morning of September 14th dawns on a new reality. The British Army, exhausted, bloodied, but victorious, are the undisputed masters of the high ground. The Plains of Abraham, so recently a field of pasture, then a battlefield, now becomes a fortress. Brigadier General George Townshend, a cautious and methodical engineer by training, is in his element. The audacity of Wolfe is replaced by the grim professionalism of Townshend. He knows the battle is won, but the war is not. He must take the city before Vaudreuil and the remaining French army can regroup and counterattack. He wastes no time. The British soldiers, who had fought a desperate battle just hours before, are now put to work with picks and shovels. They begin to entrench, reversing the situation. They construct redoubts, gun batteries, and siege lines, facing the weak western walls of Quebec. The city's fortifications on this side, built with the assumption that no army could ever reach them, are now its most vulnerable point. The true superweapon of the campaign, Admiral Saunders' Royal Navy fleet, now plays its final decisive role. The sailors, masters of logistics, begin the Herculean task of hauling heavy naval cannons up the 175-foot cliff at Anse-au-Foulon. The same path that the light infantry had scrambled up in darkness now becomes a supply line. Teams of sailors, straining at ropes and pulleys, drag 24-pounder siege guns and mortars to the summit, positioning them in the new British batteries. Inside Quebec, the atmosphere is one of complete despair. The city is commanded by the Chevalier de Ramezay, who has been left with a paltry force of militia, a few hundred colonial regulars, and sailors. He is a man abandoned. His general, Montcalm, is dead. His governor, Vaudreuil, has fled with the entire field army. His city is battered from months of naval bombardment and is now surrounded by a victorious enemy army bristling with heavy artillery. He has no food. His supplies are exhausted, and his men's morale is shattered. He sends a desperate message to Vaudreuil, begging to know if a relief force is coming. The reply is ambiguous, full of excuses. De Ramezay is on his own. By September 17th, the British siege is fully in place. Townshend's batteries are complete. The naval guns, now on land, open fire on the city's western walls at point-blank range. The bombardment is relentless and terrifying. Stone walls, which had resisted the less accurate fire from ships on the river, now begin to crumble under the precise heavy pounding from the land. The city is being pulverized. For de Ramezay, the situation is hopeless. To resist further would be to invite a final bloody assault and the massacre of the civilian population. He has no choice. He calls a council of war, and the decision is unanimous. They will capitulate. On September 18th, 1759, just 5 days after the battle, a white flag is raised over the ramparts of Quebec. A French officer is sent to the British lines to negotiate terms. By the afternoon, it is done. The articles of capitulation are signed. The garrison will be allowed to march out with the honours of war, but the city itself, the fortress, the very heart of New France, is to be surrendered to the British Crown. That afternoon, George Townshend, the man who had taken command in the final moments of the battle, stands and receives the formal surrender. The British Louisbourg Grenadiers, the same men who had held the right of Wolfe's line, march through the St. Louis Gate and take possession of the citadel. The Union Jack is raised over the rock of Quebec. The impossible gamble has paid off. The raising of the Union Jack over the citadel of Quebec was not the end of the war, it was the end of the beginning. The victory on the Plains of Abraham was a staggering tactical masterpiece, and the capture of the city was a strategic triumph. But New France was a vast territory. The French army, though defeated and demoralized, had not been destroyed. Governor-General Vaudreuil, whose panic had led to the abandonment of Quebec, had successfully retreated with the bulk of his army to Montreal. There, the French flag still flew, and a new energetic commander, the Chevalier de Lévis, was already busy regrouping the scattered French regulars and Canadian militia. They were beaten, but they were not broken, and they were now burning with a desire for revenge. For the British, the victory immediately turned into a grim, desperate struggle for survival. Brigadier General George Townshend, having secured the city, did not get to enjoy his victory. He was, by all accounts, glad to be rid of the campaign and his contentious relationship with his fallen commander, Wolfe. He took the first available ship back to England, carrying the news of the victory and claiming his share of the credit. Command of Quebec and the 7,000 British soldiers left to garrison it fell to Brigadier General James Murray, the commander of one of Wolfe's brigades. Murray was now in one of the most precarious positions of any general in the Empire. He was the master of a ruined city. The naval bombardment from Admiral Saunders' fleet, which had been so effective, had left Quebec a hollowed-out shell. The lower town was a wasteland of rubble. The upper town was severely damaged. There was little food, scant supplies, and almost no firewood. And the greatest enemy of all, the one Montcalm had been counting on, was now arriving. The Canadian winter. The Royal Navy, the British Army's lifeline, could not stay. As September turned to October, the St. Lawrence River began to show the first signs of ice. Admiral Saunders, his mission accomplished, had to save his fleet. One by one, the great ships of the line and the transports weighed anchor and sailed for home, navigating the treacherous channel before it froze solid. For the red-coated garrison, the sight of those sails disappearing downriver was a profoundly isolating moment. They were now alone. They were 7,000 men in a hostile, conquered land, surrounded by a vengeful enemy army and cut off from the rest of the world by 1,000 miles of ice and snow. The winter of 1759-1760 was brutal. The British soldiers, clad in their woolen red coats, were not equipped for the sub-zero temperatures. They were quartered in the freezing, shattered ruins of the city. Firewood became more valuable than gold. But the greatest killer was not the cold, it was scurvy. Lacking fresh vegetables and fruit, the men began to die in appalling numbers. Their joints swelled, their gums rotted, their old wounds reopened. By the time spring finally arrived, General Murray's 7,000-man fighting force had been reduced by disease to just 4,000 effective soldiers, and in Montreal, the Chevalier de Lévis had not been idle. He had spent the winter retraining and re-equipping his army. He had gathered his French regulars, the regiments of La Sarre, Royal Roussillon, and others, and combined them with thousands of hardened Canadian militia, who were now fighting to reclaim their homes. By April 1760, Lévis had a mobile, disciplined, and vengeful army of 7,000 men. He knew the British garrison was weak, and he knew the river ice was breaking up. The race was on. Whichever fleet arrived first, the British relief fleet from England or the French supply fleet from Europe, would decide the final fate of Canada. Lévis decided not to wait. He would march down the St. Lawrence, retake Quebec, and erase Wolfe's victory before the British Navy could return. The war for the continent was about to be decided, once again, just outside the walls of Quebec, April 1760. The ice on the St. Lawrence, the great frozen artery of New France, finally begins to crack and heave. The brutal winter that has held Quebec in its grip is breaking. For the 4,000 surviving British soldiers of General James Murray's garrison, it is a moment of desperate hope and profound dread. They are, as one of their own sergeants described them, a poor, pitiful handful of half-starved scorbutic skeletons. Scurvy and frostbite have done what the French army could not, but with the spring thaw comes the enemy. From Montreal, the Chevalier de Lévis, the talented and vengeful successor to Montcalm, is on the march. He has gathered a new army of over 7,000 men, a corps of 3,900 French regulars from the Troupe de Terre and Compagnie Franche de la Marine, augmented by thousands of hardened Canadian militia and their First Nations allies. His plan is simple: retake Quebec before the British fleet can return. On April 27th, Lévis' army is sighted. They are landing at the same place Montcalm had failed to properly defend, upstream from the city. General Murray is now faced with the exact same choice that Montcalm had faced just 7 months earlier. He can stay behind the city walls, which his men have worked all winter to improve, and withstand a siege. His fortress is strong, and his men, though sick, are regulars. Or he can march out and meet the French on the open field. Murray, perhaps haunted by the ghost of his former commander, General Wolfe, makes a fateful and arrogant decision. He looks at his 3,886 effective soldiers, his 10 regular battalions, his companies of light infantry and rangers, and his powerful artillery train of 20 cannons and 2 howitzers. He believes his scorbutic skeletons are still superior to anything the French can field. He fears that if he lets Lévis entrench and set up siege batteries on the high ground, the city will be doomed. He will not wait. He will do what Wolfe did. He will march out onto the plains of Abraham and destroy the French army in a single decisive battle. On the morning of April 28, 1760, the gates of Quebec swing open and the British army marches out. It is a terrible, tragic echo of the previous battle, but in reverse. This time, it is the British who are marching out of the city and the French who are waiting for them on the high ground near the village of Sainte-Foy. Murray deploys his men in a thin 2-rank line, just as Wolfe had done, to maximize his frontage. The two armies are now standing on the same ground, a field of history, about to replay the battle, but having swapped positions. The terrain, however, is not the dry, grassy pasture of September. It is a sodden, spongy morass of melting snowdrifts, half-frozen mud, and standing water. As the British begin their advance, their cannons, the very artillery they are counting on, become hopelessly bogged down in the muck. The British soldiers, weakened by their terrible winter, struggle to advance through the clinging mud. Their initial attack has some success, pushing back the French advanced guard. But this success is a trap. Their own advance masks their cannon fire, and as they push forward, Lévis' main force, now 5,000 strong on the field, counterattacks. The battle dissolves into a brutal 2-hour slugfest. This is not the 15-minute decisive volley of Wolfe's battle. This is a desperate, close-quarters brawl in the mud. The French, more numerous and more familiar with the terrain, begin to turn the British flanks. The fighting is savage, often hand-to-hand, with bayonets and musket butts. The British line, stretched thin and exhausted, begins to buckle. Murray, seeing his flanks collapsing, finally realizes his mistake. He has replicated Montcalm's failure to the letter. He orders the retreat. The British, their line broken, flee in a disorganized rout back to the safety of Quebec, leaving their 20 cannons, their entire artillery train, stuck in the mud for the French to capture. The Battle of Sainte-Foy is a bloody, decisive French victory. It is, in fact, far bloodier than the first battle. The British suffer over 100 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. The French, 833. The Chevalier de Lévis is now the master of the field. He has won his revenge. The roles were now perfectly, terribly reversed. Inside the walls of Quebec, General Murray and his defeated British army, having suffered over 1,000 casualties, were now the besieged. Outside the walls, on the very same plains of Abraham, the Chevalier de Lévis and his victorious French army began to dig siege lines. The irony was bitter. Lévis's men, with a triumphant cheer, seized the 20 heavy British cannons and 2 howitzers that Murray had abandoned in the mud. They hauled these guns, the same weapons that had been dragged up the Anse-au-Foulon to capture the city, and turned them around. The British were now to be bombarded by their own artillery. The siege of Quebec began in earnest. The French, energized by their victory at Sainte-Foy, dug trenches and batteries, their fire pounding the city that had been their own just months before. For Murray's garrison, the situation was desperate. They were low on ammunition, starving, and now outnumbered and outgunned. They had only one hope left: the St. Lawrence River. The ice was gone. The channel was open. Everything, the fate of Quebec, the war, the continent, now rested on a simple race. Whose ships would arrive first? If the French fleet arrived from Europe, bringing supplies, food, and reinforcements for Lévis, Quebec would fall. The British victory of 1759 would be erased, and New France would be reborn. If the Royal Navy arrived first, Lévis' siege would be broken, and the British would be saved. Every man in the city, from General Murray down to the lowliest private, spent every waking moment scanning the river, past the Île d'Orléans, staring at the horizon for the sight of a sail. The tension was unbearable. On May 9th, 1760, a ship was spotted, a frigate. It was too distant to make out its colours. The city held its breath. Was this the vanguard of French salvation or British relief? The ship drew closer, tacked against the wind, and as it rounded the bend, a flag was run up the mast. It was not the white Bourbon flag of France. It was the white ensign of the Royal Navy. The ship was HMS Lowestoft, the first of the British relief squadron. For the starving garrison, the sight was one of almost religious deliverance. They erupted in cheers from the ramparts, their cries echoing across the plains, a sound of pure joy that struck the French besiegers with dread. The Lowestoft was just the beginning. Within days, the rest of the British fleet, commanded by Commodore Swanton, sailed up the river. The race was over. The Royal Navy had won. The fleet brought everything: fresh troops, ammunition, and most importantly, food. The siege was broken. For the Chevalier de Lévis, it was a moment of utter despair. He had no naval support. A few small French frigates that had supported his army were now hopelessly trapped. The British ships of the line, HMS Vanguard and HMS Diana, immediately sailed past the city and attacked the French vessels. The fight was a mismatch. The French ships were destroyed, run aground, and burned by their own crews to prevent capture. With the Royal Navy controlling the river, Lévis' supply line was cut. He could not feed his army, nor could he hope to take a city that was now being reinforced and resupplied from the sea. His gamble had failed. On the night of May 16th, Lévis gave the order. He abandoned his siege, leaving behind the captured British cannons. His army, demoralized and defeated not by Murray but by sea power, began the long final retreat to Montreal. The war was effectively over. The final campaign was a methodical tightening of the noose. 3 British armies, one from Quebec under Murray, one from Lake Champlain, and a third from Lake Ontario under General Amherst, converged on Montreal, the last bastion of New France. On September 8, 1760, Governor-General Vaudreuil, seeing the futility of further resistance, signed the Articles of Capitulation. All of New France was surrendered to the British Crown. The fate of a continent, as the idea overview proposed, had indeed been decided in those 15 minutes on the Plains of Abraham. Wolfe's audacious gamble, his secret landing, and the impossible climb had not won the war in a single day. But it had won the decisive battle. That one, perfect volley, double-shotted at 40 paces, had broken the back of Montcalm's army and captured the fortress that was the key to the continent. It was a victory that was almost undone by arrogance and the brutal Canadian winter. But it was a victory that held. It was the pivot upon which history turned, a single, bloody, and brilliant moment that ensured North America would, for all time, speak the language and follow the laws of the victors. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you in the next video.